Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So on this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, we're welcoming Michel, who describes himself as a father, a psychologist, an advisor to C-suite leaders and executive teams and HR practitioners. He's French and American. He has a PhD in organizational psychology from Columbia University, and endless experience of military, public, private, professional, financial, and commercial institutions of all sorts. Michel, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire. Happy to be here with you today.
Okay, so let's start, as we always do, with a picture of your career journey so far. You've been through several pivots and challenges in your career, beginning as an officer in the French Navy, moving through various public services in New York, onto investment banking, and through generalist consulting to specializing in various aspects of leadership consulting. You've even done academia. Tell us how this extraordinary career unfolded, and was it by design or through serendipity? And what have been your key achievements and challenges along the way?
Well, I wish there was a grand old design behind this, but hardly. I think it was really a blend of meeting certain people. I think it's about the external events of what was happening in the world, and then sort of my own desire of what interested me and what I wanted to do. So I think it's a bit of a combination. I think that in terms of external events, and I'll get into that maybe a little bit later, but obviously economic fluctuations have an impact on consulting. So that was one. I think that the meeting people was probably the most significant, right? So I think part of what I enjoy the most about my work is who I work with, who are my colleagues, who has been my boss, who my clients are. And so I think that I kind of retain a key lesson from one of my early mentors, the late David Nadler, who summed up his career in 10 major lessons learned. The top one, which really stuck with me, was the relationship aspect, the fact that affiliations, organizational affiliations are transient. They're less and less, they last less and less. And so relationship is everything. The people you meet and the relationship you build in the course of your career is really what matters, is the only constant, maybe. So I'll lead with that in terms of a key factor of progression in my career. I think the interest, and I think the other thing is just wanting to learn or gain some experiences. I think I'm a learning-oriented person. I seek new experiences. And so when I've had opportunities to join an organization where I could learn a new skill, acquire a new type of experience, then that's always also been very interesting to me.
Beautiful. Okay, those are wonderful red threads for us to think about. And actually, they lead us quite neatly on to the next question as a reflection. In pretty much every role you've held, you've had some sort of direct or indirect focus on the development of fellow humans. We're wondering what lessons you've learned working in all these varied contexts. What are the common traits of human development? And from where is the most inspiration for even better work coming?
I'm trained as both a clinical psychologist and an organizational psychologist. So I walk around with those lenses, sometimes to my family's discontent. So my kids will regularly tell me, "Yeah, I'm not your client." I say, "Okay, great."
We share that.
I think I sort of bring that lens with me. And so I think there are things that I tend to recognize. That's actually something that I learned along the way in my career, a way of thinking about what we have in common. And the piece maybe that I pay most attention to is the drive to achieve a purpose. I think that's kind of the commonality that I see between people and what I try to identify with people when I work with them is that element of I guess, their persona, who they are, their identity, is beyond the achievement they're seeking to obtain in the course of their careers. the why behind it. What is the purpose that they're looking to live by, they're looking to realize? I think that's what we have in common. We don't necessarily go through life with an awareness of what that purpose is, but I do think that it is always running a bit like a computer and its operating system in the background. Part of my mission or my own purpose is to help people identify what that is so that they can get to the places in the world and in their lives where they most want to go.
That's lovely. That's the notion of the North Star, I'm guessing, that we'll come back to and dig into in a little bit more detail later. Now, if we think back to your own career and all kinds of big transitions that you've made, why don't you pick the particular transition that you found most significant and difficult and tell us about how you set about making it a success? And then building on that, why don't you talk us through some of the best practices in transitions of some of the leaders that you work with?
Different events can have an impact on the course of your career. And the case that I'm going to focus on was an external event. So back in 2008, with the economic crisis gearing up, I was at a firm where I was in the research department, and we were the first hit by the crisis. And so I sort of, had to kind of look for another location, another place. I thought that I would work on my own and kind of my own company set up. And I did have it set up like the day I started. But then, I had a kind of a network. A lot of people I knew. I was very active with the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology and other network of psychologists. And a good friend of mine, I found out, was looking for a third partner. He and his business partner had started a set up shop a few years earlier, and they were looking for someone else with my profile. And it was really a great fit. And so, unexpected, a couple months after I had left the first organization I joined, where I started my career. And it was a great experience. I got to be, in an entrepreneurial role where you sort of do everything. To this day, sometimes my colleagues say, "Where did you learn PowerPoint skills?" So, well, when there's three of you and you have to do everything pretty much, you learn quickly. And so it was a great experience. So I think that is probably the one I would highlight. Two more things. So in terms of a key takeaway, I think it's being open to what comes your way, recognizing the opportunity and the potential in new situations, keeping a growth mindset, not being so set on, I could have decided, no, I'm going to stick to my own thing. But this was really a fun adventure to be part of the Fisher Rock team. So that's one thing. And then the other, I remember that a recruiter called me, and when he interviewed me, and this is still, I'm not going to say the name, but they're still in business. And when he found out that it was a layoff, he abruptly ended the conversation. He didn't even really want to consider going further. And, I just thought to myself that this is such a narrow approach to understanding people. It's still something I think about. It's an interesting thing anyway. So a reflection that you learn from the things that work, and you also learn from the things what not to do and not how to treat people, I guess.
Absolutely. I love the introduction of the how to treat people bit. It's so important because we are all, in the end, done as we would be done by, aren't we?
That's right.
Anyway, let's flip back to early career professionals. You've talked to some degree about, mid and later career changes. What advice would you give to somebody who's graduated recently and is just starting out in their career in business?
That's a great question. And actually, that's happened recently where, at Ferry, we hire interns from our interns. And so I had the opportunity to work closely with someone who just come out of graduate school. I think it's the guidance I would give is do your research. There's a lot of organizations out there that seem to be doing the same thing, but they don't necessarily do the same thing. And the culture is quite different. And so culture really matters. Try to find out as much as you can. Now, I think it also depends where you are in your career. I think if you're early in your career, I would say it's great to have a variety of experiences of different cultures. So maybe it's more about what are you going to learn? What's the potential for learning and for development and to accelerate your own development? The more you kind of move along in your career, the more I think you want to pay attention to the culture and what it feels like to be in a particular organization. I'm very fortunate that I find that for me that I landed in a place where I am now, where the culture fit feels really good. And partly is one of the practice that I would say, so it's less from the job seeker perspective, it's more from the organizational perspective. But when we recruit people, we have a lot of interviews. We tend to do more interviews than maybe the typical. And partly it's because we want to learn about the candidate, but partly also it's great for the candidate to get multiple points of experiences in terms of meeting with different people and getting a feel of what it's going to be like to work in that organization.
Very, very important. Though I won't quote the particular occasion, but even then, it doesn't always work. I had 31 interviews to join one particular organization, and there still wasn't a fit. We'll talk about that offline another time. Now, that almost brings us quite logically into the question about crisis. You wrote an article recently during the obvious pandemic crisis, and you listed some leadership tips that might help leaders to work through that time. Now, it seems to me that we haven't really exited any sort of crisis since 2019, so I guess the article is still pretty relevant. You talked about the fact that leaders need to be confident, positive, empathetic, and resilient. And the most effective approach is to express a vision that becomes everybody's North Star, to communicate frequently, saying the only thing faster than the speed of light are rumors. Act, show a bias for action, accepting feedback and course correcting. Seek clarity, even with difficult topics. Keep it simple and prioritize what's most important. Now, would you care to comment on or update these recommendations for 2023?
Maybe sort of what they have in common, all these things converge into a leader's ability to frame and to create a sense of confidence and regain a sense of confidence, because I think that's probably the currency that evaporates the quickest in the time of crisis is a sense of confidence. I used to lead the leadership resilience practice in North America for my previous employer. And there was a number of things that we paid attention to, but that confidence piece was always the most interesting to me, because I think that really shapes so much of what other people's experience is going to be. And so I think that what's behind these different practices that you listed, I think is the sense of wanting to create a sense of confidence and followership from others, giving them an opportunity to develop their own vision, to recognize their own ability to overcome the crisis, to recognize the opportunities for growth or for innovation. So I think that, just to keep it short, I would say probably that's the dimension that I would leave the listener with.
Wonderful. That's a very succinct and powerful summary. Thank you. Now, inclusion is one of the big topics you worked with, and another recent article in which you were talking about inclusive leadership, you listed 5 traits that make for great inclusion. And those were authenticity, emotional resilience, inquisitiveness, self-assurance, and flexibility. And you also went on to explain what such inclusive leaders can and should do. Could you elaborate on this for us?
It's the distinction that we make between traits and behaviors. Traits is sort of your personality, things that are shaped at a young age. They're not immutable. You can influence it, but having an awareness of what these are. And we think that these traits are sort of a bit of a bedrock on which, any individual can build. But then there are practices, there are behaviors that you can engage in. And we separate those two things of traits and behaviors. And there's a number of behaviors. It's about building interpersonal trust. So do you demonstrate that you value differences with people, that you are able to disclose, that you're able to be reliable, be consistent, have integrity, all these things, right? So that trust is foundational. So there's a number of practices that I would recommend leaders really kind of pay attention to. See the diversity of perspectives and seek out that diversity of perspective. And that goes through how broad and diverse your network is. I think that your mindset or your outlook on life is very much determined by how broad and diverse your network is. How do you make the most out of the talent that you have? So as an inclusive leader, part of your responsibility is to build an inclusive organization, or surround yourself with diverse talent that can provide different perspectives, that have different experiences, that enrich the conversation. I do a lot of work with teams, and I always tell team leaders to pay particularly attention to that. What's the conversation? What's the discussion they want to have when they bring their team together? Do they want to have people who all think kind of the same thing and have the same experience? Or do they want to hear different points of view, right? Obviously, there's more practices but these are the ones maybe that I might focus on.
Wonderful. I love that question. It's a disobliging question in service of the right way, encouraging people to get more uncomfortable conversations into their lives will indeed take them in the right direction, but it's not the easiest path for sure. Now, you've made a great success of managing your own diversified career. And a significant part of your work in leadership advisory is to support your CEO and other C-suite clients in managing their own careers. And as a coach and a trusted advisor, you face the challenge, as do Antoine and I, of having clients who are coming to you typically via their organizations, who have a vested interest in those individuals not just becoming the best version possible of themselves, but also in those individuals staying inside the organization most of the time. Of course, there's sometimes the other side of that, but that's another story. So how do you juggle this sometimes complex coaching triangle and balance the interests and confidentiality of all parties?
It's no different from many other situations where we find ourselves as consultants or in our roles where we span a bit boundaries, right? Where we're sort of a bit on the boundaries, where we have multiple stakeholders that don't necessarily all have the same expectations or the same needs. So I don't know that I would make a distinction, particularly around here. Like, I think it is so embedded into the very nature of the work that we do. What I would say is contracting is key, right? You want to set the right expectations. So if I was to focus on one aspect of how you do it, I think there's a number of things that you want to pay attention to, but it starts with good contracting and good expectation setting. And so at the onset of a coaching relationship, you want to make sure that you contract around what is the work of coaching and the fact that there's multiple clients. And the way I see it, I don't want to say that there's a hierarchy. There's all of the stakeholders matter. You have an organization that pays the bill typically, so that matters. They're buying a service, but then you're serving the individual whose interests might diverge, right? And so I think you need to bring all your skills and your ability to navigate sort of that complexity to the role. But I think that contracting helps at least remove some of that noise or some of that complexity by just having very clear guidelines, and the fact that you have an obligation of confidentiality around what gets discussed. That's a great mechanism to protect at least sort of one of the stakeholders in the situation.
Absolutely. But it never stops being complex, does it? However many coaching assignments you do.
I have to say, yeah, I think it's people probably who are also earlier in their career. I think that's something that they're more likely to experience. And so a great way is seek mentorship, seek guidance, consult with people who have more years of doing this work and can share with you, these insights. You have to figure it all out on your own.
So very true. That actually brings me to the question that I'd like to ask you about what you would be telling your 18-year-old self if you could go back to him. A very different question, I believe, from just the general one of what advice would you give to an early career professional? I'd love to know what you would be telling 18-year-old Michel if you could.
I think my 18-year-old self, it's funny because I asked that question sometimes in the course of my work. I feel like I was such in a different world and a different place that the life I have now probably would seem very surreal to my 18-year-old self. But I would say keep your interest broad, learn a lot, be confident. Don't rush in. Like, don't try to do things too quickly, to make decisions too quickly, because there's a lot of different things you can be doing. And I think just keep an open mind, keep a very broad perspective on things. It's all going to help you. I love philosophy and I love reading philosophy work. And I feel that I think for a time early in my career, I sort of put that aside a bit. Same thing with literature. I used to read a lot of fiction, a lot of literature, and I kind of put it aside thinking, I got to focus on psychology. I have to really. And that was maybe not needed. Maybe it's a sacrifice that wasn't really needed, because in the end, it all really gets used. It all gets utilized and integrated into the work you do. And to this day, in my coaching, I'll often reference literature, or I'll bring sort of a particular philosophical topic that I find is relevant to the conversation that I'm having with my clients.
Absolutely. Yes. If all you do is spout leadership theory, then you very quickly become a tired sort of coach, don't you?
Yeah, exactly. It's really about bringing everything from your life. Everything is really helpful. You can make use of so many different things and so many different materials about your experience. So I would say cultivate your difference, cultivate what sets you apart, what's going to give you a different vantage point, because that is actually very useful and brings a lot of value to others.
It is. And it's probably very hard for most 18-year-olds to hear. But usually those messages that are hard to hear are the ones that we need. Now, let's look out to the world of organizations doing great talent or career management. Do you have any great examples, either named or anonymous, who are doing particularly well in these respects?
A couple of things that come to mind. Making a conscious choice to make it a priority. I mean, it starts to me sound really obvious, right? But if you're in an organization that doesn't necessarily identify this as part of the purpose, it's unlikely that it's going to happen or that it's going to be done well. So I think it starts with identifying talent management as a strategic priority. That's something that actually drives performance. And then, how do you establish it? I think it's a combination. I always like to talk about structure and behavior. So through structure and behavior. So set up the right structure to do great talent management. What does that mean? That means you define clearly accountability. It doesn't mean that you have to have this big talent management function, right? That's not necessarily going to get you to where you need to go, but it's more how are you setting it up? How do you set up that work and having, people in the organization be on board and understanding what its function is supposed to do and how it's supposed to be working. So that's more of the structural element, having meetings, regular town reviews, or all these different sort of governance elements. And then from a behavior perspective, the people that are in the organization have to have that mindset of valuing talent, of thinking about not just performance, but also development, to look at talent, not just from have these people achieved, what they said they were going to achieve from a business perspective, from a performance perspective, but how they're learning, how they're developing, how they're unlocking their potential. And so I guess that's where I would leave you with this sort of maybe that consideration of making sure that you're addressing both the structural and the behavioral elements of talent management.
That's really useful. Thank you. Well, we're nearly at the end. I guess, we all want to know what your most exciting projects are for 2023. You've got so many different things going on, but what's going to be getting you all lit up next year?
On a personal side, I have 2 children who are going to start college. So that's that's their project, but, I'm sort of vicariously going to be living through this. But professionally, I think what is exciting me right now is I'm co-writing a book with a colleague that we'll be writing in 2023 and hopefully publishing in early 2024. I've wanted to do this for a long time. I've written chapters for books, but never like a whole book. I love reading, I love books. And so this is a natural progression, and I'm very excited about that. So hopefully maybe we'll have a follow-up interview.
We just might
2024
yes.
about this, which is very relevant to what we're discussing today.
Oh, how exciting. Well, we look forward to that very much. Michel, it's been an absolute pleasure having you with us today. We've covered all kinds of things, and as you rightly identified, we could have gone down all kinds of exciting and interesting rabbit holes, but we've done well. We've managed it beautifully, and thank you so much for all the insight you've brought. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your invitation. It was a pleasure.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.